People want to feel a value and a sense of purpose, today, and they don't necessarily, place as much emphasis on I need this great big payday.
We have a special guest today, Okorie Ramsey. He's the Vice President of Sarbanes-Oxley at Kaiser Permanente. He also the immediate past chair of AICPA. So, Okorie, thank you so much for being on my podcast today.
I am so pleased to be here with you, and it's exciting to be here on this podcast. I've heard so much about your podcast. I'm glad I've had the pleasure to meet you in person, but looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Okorie. But before we start, I would love to know a little bit about you. So can you just give us a quick introduction about yourself?
Absolutely. Again, I'm a vice president of Sarbanes-Oxley for Kaiser Permanente, which is a integrated healthcare system based out of Oakland, California, and we're broad market a national organization. But in terms of the things that you don't know, I've been in my career for now 30 plus years. I have two children and a wife. My kids are one is grown now. He's actually a junior kind of slash senior at LMU, focusing on accounting. And I have a daughter who is in her junior year in high school, and she's studying to. She wants to eventually follow her mom's footsteps and become a pediatrician. But I really enjoy mentoring. I love working with young people, but also really being an advocate of our profession. I think we have an amazing profession. I know we're going to get into a lot of really good stuff on that, but it's something I've been passionate about for a very long time, and really pleased to be able to serve not only with the ICPA, but in other volunteer organizations, NABA, the ACAP program, Cal CPA, and so many other organizations that I've had the pleasure of serving, because I believe service is really an important component of who I am, but I think what we need to do as a country.
Thank you so much. And it sounds like you are a very busy dad and you still super active for volunteering activities. I have no idea how you can manage all the time. So
Well, you make time for things that are important to you. So while I agree that really being involved, it's kind of in my DNA. I think I consider myself somewhat of a joiner. I like to be a part of things that are bigger than me. That things that I can actually contribute to and make a difference. And so you do find the times, and I have this saying that I know many others will use as well, that to whom much is given, much is expected, or much is required, right? And so ultimately, that is something that I feel the responsibility to give back and to be impactful in ways that I can to really make a positive difference.
thank you so much for everything you have done so far. I know you have done a lot, and we're going to talk a lot about what you have done as well. But let's start from very beginning when you just start in college. Why did you decide to choose accounting major?
Well, how I came into accounting was that it started when I was in high school. So there was a program that was literally a simulation course that I took for my junior and senior year in high school that gave me kind of the accounting bug. I learned about the balance sheet, income statement, cash flows, how to kind of run a business. And again, it was a simulation course, so I was responsible for all those type of activities, making sure that we had financial statements and that we were making money again in this fictitious business, and taking care of writing the checks, and just being accountable for the financials of an organization. And so I knew upon going into college that I was going to major in accounting, and honestly, I never looked back. So from day one going in, I knew that was going to be where I was going to go. Now, could I predict where this career would take me? No idea, but it has been phenomenal. And again, that is also why I feel the responsibility to give back, because I feel like I've been very fortunate in the opportunities that I've had.
So after you graduate from your accounting degree, it looks like you start working at PwC as your first job.
Well, actually, so this is now I'm going to take you a little bit way back, Rosie. That my first job was actually with Coopers and Lybrand, which is the predecessor to PricewaterhouseCoopers. So Coopers and Lybrand was one of what we called at that time the big eight accounting firms. And when I was in college, it was really the big 10, and they were merging to become the big eight and then the big six and so on. So actually I interned with Arthur Anderson for it was like a CPA for a week program. So it was really a short internship, but it gave you kind of a taste of what it was to be in the field working with a senior accountant and just learning a little bit of the business. I then also interned with Coopers and Lybrand, but Coopers and Lybrand was really more like an after school job because I was going to classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays in college, and I was going to Coopers and Lybrand on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? And so I was learning, through like working every day, practically every day, and then weekends sometimes to just learn the organization. And while I was doing that, I actually had a chance to work with a small group of individuals to look at how Deloitte could revamp their recruiting process for college students. And so, for about 6 weeks during my senior year, I had an opportunity to participate in that program as well. So, I literally was working for two firms at one time, at one time, but it was really more so just to understand the recruiting process and how they could evolve it, right, for students. And so, so really, those who participated in the program ultimately got an offer to join the firm, in addition to what I had with my Coopers and Lybrand work.
Because you work at Cooper's as the first job after you graduate, do you see any issues that you have to work so many hours, or you have any issues making connections right after you graduate?
So I guess I didn't think about it that way at the time in terms of working a lot of hours. There were what we call busy season, which still exists, but not to the same degree as I think it exists today. I mean, it's still busy without question. That there are going to be peak seasons, there are going to be valleys within the span of a career. And while I believe that we are, as a profession, seeking to evolve that because the needs of what people want in terms of a career now is different than what it was when I was coming up. The priorities are different. The value that individuals place on what is termed work life balance is greater now than I believe it was when I was coming up. And while I will tell you, and we may even get into this later, that I'm really not a work life balance person, I'm more of a work life integration person of how you integrate the things that happen in life with your work. And I got many stories of how I've ultimately done that. It makes for me to have kind of a like I'm where I need to be at the time that I need to be there, right? Versus feeling like I have my work and then I have my life, and then somehow they're going to be balanced. Because in my view, I've never seen a day where my life has truly been balanced, right, between work and in career, or I should say career in personal life. Something is always going to be in a priority. It may be something in life, right, that's happening that I need to be very focused on what's going on in that environment. But then at another time, it may be something that I very much need to do at work, and that's going to be a higher priority. But as long as I feel like I'm never really missing something and that I'm present wherever I need to be, that works for me. But everyone has to figure out what that looks like for themselves.
I like how you mentioned about different needs. Like the needs that we have right now is different from the needs that we had way in the past. So I
Yeah.
know that right now we need about work-life balance. Are there any other needs you think that people focus on at this time?
I would say when I think about just specifically around our profession, that having a sense of purpose, in their work, that it's not enough to feel like I've work every day and I make, and when I say every day, just primarily during the week and occasionally, just so that it's very clear. Sometimes there's going to be weekends, but ultimately I work routinely, and I like make a salary, and then I eventually retire. That's not the way that people are thinking today. They definitely want to feel value in that they're making a contribution in their work. And how does that translate into just greater good, right? Or that they've made an impact on an organization, or they've made an impact just somewhere in the world. It could be climate, it could be so many things. That's again a high priority. I believe another priority, and this kind of gets to the work we've done with the National Pipeline Advisory Group, around what are the things that are that either stand in the way of people entering the profession, or things that they need to kind of have solved for them to feel like this is the right place for them to be. So that could be, the cost of education. It could be, again, the quality and the value that they place in the work that they're able to do. The amount of what the career path looks like, longer term, to have that, like that insight early on, versus feeling like I've got to wait until I've spent 10, 15 years in my career before I get kind of the brass ring. Right? We can't, operate in that way. People want to feel a value and a sense of purpose, today, and they don't necessarily, place as much emphasis on, I need this great big payday, that may happen down the line. They really want to, have a sense of, like, enjoy life today. And I get that. I completely understand that, and it's something we have to recognize in terms of how we look at the profession, and making sure that people who are entering the profession feel the impact and the value of what we do every day.
Because you mentioned about the sense of purpose and also education and experience. As you know, that a lot of people they change the career from one career to another career, or they change from private to public, or they change from one position to another position within accounting profession. So they already have some background experience under their belt. But when they move to the new area in the accounting profession, do they have to start from entry level? Do they have to follow the rule of thumbs on you have to work on 2 years in order to be the senior, 3 years to be the manager? Do we still have to follow the timeline for promotion? Or we should focus more on the work quality, focus more on the experience to decide if that person should be promoted or not?
Right. Well, so thank you for that, Rosie. And I would tell you that a career is nowadays anything but linear. Right. So ultimately, you may have to, like, be in a different field, but because of the background and knowledge that you bring, that could very easily accelerate your path if you decide that you now want to be in, say, public accounting. And the flip side is also true when you start out in public accounting and maybe you move into industry, because there are so many opportunities for the different types of work that we can do. Because people typically think audit or tax, right? I mean, that's and they think, big four, or if I did make it into the big four, I failed. Well, there's internal audit, there's SOX, right? There's all types of consulting that you can do. There's financial advisory practices, transactional advisory, due diligence, right? Internal and external audit. I mean, there's so many different places you can go in your career, and the level of expertise that you bring from maybe an industry expertise that can really help you to, further the direction that you might want to go. So I try to make sure that people understand that there's so many options, and don't get locked into just the idea of it's, again, audit or tax, or it's public accounting, or just, private industry. There's government, there's academia. I mean, there's so many places where we need, really smart people to really work within this profession. And so I don't believe that it's you just kind of go, one path up the ladder. But you also have to recognize that sometimes you may have to pivot and do something differently. It may mean taking a step back to take two steps forward, or doing something in an area that, again, that you may not be as comfortable in, but that you have the skill set, because a lot of the things that we do are very, cross functional. They're things that you can, really utilize in a different area than what you may have thought when you initially start working in a given place.
So when you have experience at Cooper's for 5 years, you move to experienced manager at Arthur Anderson Business Consulting for about 4 years. So what made you make that move in your career?
Well, so at the time when I was going from Coopers and Lybrand to Arthur Anderson, I was working in the Chicago office of Coopers and Lybrand, and I knew that I wanted to get back to the Bay Area, and but at the same time, we were going through the merger with Price Waterhouse. So it was Coopers and Lybrand and Price Waterhouse were merging to make PwC. And I mean, it was an interesting environment, but it was also, somewhat stressful, honestly, because you have two very different styles of firms coming together. And in my opinion, it was definitely more of an acquisition than a merger, in that PW became more of the, I'll say, more dominant presence than Coopers and Lybrand from my vantage point, right? And so I decided that I still enjoyed working in public accounting, but with all the change, and it wasn't like it was overnight. It took some time to really get those two organizations to really operate as one, which is not unusual for when two organizations that are of similar size come together, right? But ultimately, I decided I would still want to work in the public accounting arena, but I moved over to Anderson. And when I moved over to Anderson, I was in Chicago, which was the headquarters for the world. Right, so the international firm was headquartered right there in Chicago. And so it was a wonderful time to be there because you saw everything first. Right. So things that happened in Chicago wouldn't reach San Francisco or New York or other parts of the country until maybe 6 or 9 months later, because they were being piloted, at home in headquarters. And so, but working with Anderson at that time, it allowed me to also transfer to the Bay Area when I was ready to move back to the Bay Area, because my wife was actually in going to medical. Or at that point, she was going into her residency, and we were going to do that back in the Bay Area. Funny thing, she actually ended up doing a residency with Kaiser Permanente. Now, who knew 10 years later or something, I would be joining the organization in finance. But it was a wonderful opportunity to work still with a very large organization and be in a similar environment, but working in a different firm, which is something that you didn't see a lot of back at that time. Now you could be at Deloitte on Tuesday and at PwC on Friday, right? People change all the time, but at that time it really wasn't happening much. And but I was really pleased to have that opportunity to make that transition and still do really quality work. But the last thing I'll share with you there would be that negotiation is key, right? So I negotiated to transfer from San Francisco to Chicago with Coopers and Lybrand because that's where I wanted to work and live at that time. Because my wife, or at that time, my fiance, was she was going to medical school. And then I negotiated to get back to the Bay Area with Anderson, right? So anything is possible, right? You just have to ultimately know what you want, be able to state your business case for why it makes sense for this to happen. And oftentimes, organizations will work with you to make the transitions that happen in life, because life's going to happen.
You mentioned about negotiation skills. Those skills are so important at this time, especially when our profession is just so demanding. Can you share some tips about negotiations skills? How can staffs negotiate with their employers to share what they want and obtain what they want?
Well, so I'm glad you asked that, because I believe that it's important for you. You have to know your value. You have to know what you bring to the table, but you also have to know the organization and what its needs are. And you have to be able to communicate how what you want align with the values and needs of the organization, because it's never a one-way street, right? But you can't be working under the assumption that the organization is going to understand what's happening with you and what your life needs are. You have to be the owner of your career and making sure that you're communicating what those things are. But again, that aligns with understanding your value. What type of accounts are you on? What industries do you impact? What have your scores been in terms of your evaluation? Right? What are the things that you believe you can bring to the table in terms of value with the decision that you're trying to make, right? In terms of where you want to go, and how will that ultimately help the organization to further its goals, initiatives, and targets. You have to be able to align those things, because no one's going to just do this because it's a nice thing to do. Right? You gotta have to recognize that people are looking out. What's in it for me? And that's no different from an organization as well. Well, what's in it for me by letting you do this or helping you to get there? Part of that could very well be I've got a happy employee, and that's a great thing. But more times than not, organizations are looking at how does this help translate to the bottom line, add value to my customer base, or move market share. I mean, there are a number of different things that organizations are driven by, and you have to understand what those things are, right? And if you are able to align what you are interested in doing with those value propositions or what's important to the organization, you're going to be able to move the needle, right? But if you don't have that understanding, if you haven't done your research, right, if you're not a student of the organization, it's going to be harder to get what you want. And then have advocates. Talk with people who know the organization, who've been around for some time, who can either speak on your behalf and help you to negotiate what you're looking to achieve.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not one-way street. You have to understand who you're talking with and what you offer on the table in order to achieve win-win solution that firm wins and you win as well.
Exactly, without question.
Yeah. And I look at your career timeline. It looks like after you work at Arthur Anderson for 4 years and you move to work at Robert Half International for 2 years, and then you go back to the big four firms at EY. So can you just explain that circle? Why?
Absolutely. Well, and there's some interesting twists and turns there. So when I decided to leave Anderson, I was an experienced manager, and I kind of had what I call the what ifs. Right? I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay to partner, and I was just kind of in this space of I like what I'm doing, but at the same time, don't know if that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And you just start to think about, well, what if I never make a move and I just stay put and like, where do I go? But I will tell you that making that move was one of the best decisions that I've made. Like I wouldn't say it was the absolute best because I think there are other things I've done, that were really great decisions as well. But in this particular case, at that time, the what I did not know what was going on in Texas between Enron and Anderson, in that literally within 6 to 9 months after making that decision to go to Robert Half International, Enron became a significant issue, very public, and unfortunately, two organizations went down in that process. Anderson being the other party, and because of the high integrity that that organization had in the type of business that they were in, that's something that was very very difficult to recover from. Right? Your brand, your reputation is tarnished based on that experience. And now I believe that somehow the brand is kind of being reestablished, maybe like Anderson Tax and some other like elements of people who had been around. But think of all the years that have passed since that time to get to some level of name recognition again, right? But also there's still the bad experience, right? That people still note, from that time. So I left Anderson to go to Robert Half International. I was a senior manager of operational accounting within Robert Half, and I really enjoyed working for the organization. But it was also for me in the role that I had. I deemed it kind of a flat organization. There wasn't a lot of places that I could go in the work that I was doing, and I learned that pretty quickly. Now, what I decided to do was I stayed put for 2 years because I wanted to, one, learn the organization. I wanted to be impactful in the organization, but I also knew that this wasn't going to be necessarily the long term play for me. Now, what was interesting is while I was at Robert Half, Anderson's risk consulting business was acquired by Robert Half International. So that became, if you're familiar with the term productivity, Anderson's risk consult business became Protiviti within Robert Half International. And so, yeah, so I had a wonderful experience of being very, very familiar with the Arthur Anderson environment in the Robert Half organization to where I could help build out what would become their timesheets, their revenue recognition rules, right? So knowing the debits and credits behind, okay, if we do this type of activity, this is what that's going to translate into revenue within the Robert Half organization. And I was responsible for a report. It was called our KPI, the Key Performance Indicator. It went to the top four leaders of the Protiviti, which was now within the Robert Half organization, as well as the CFO of Robert Half. And this report told us the revenues, operating expenses, gross margin of the organization as they were building out. So this is something that was literally like, call it 15 to 20 offices, across the country that were literally just starting to build out what was going to become, a larger productivity. And so it was wonderful to be a part of building something. Like literally one of the things that actually you might not be able to see it, but behind me, there's actually a tombstone that I have from being a part of the build out of productivity. And again, something I'm very proud of in terms of one of the things that I've been able to do, in my career. But that's what kind of moved me from Anderson to Robert Half. Now, what brought me back into public? So knowing that Robert Half was for me somewhat of a flat organization in terms of opportunity of what I thought I could do, I decided to go back into public accounting, after 2 years because again, learned some really good things, had some new skills, experiences that I thought were really valuable, but also I didn't want to be limited by what I thought that environment was going to look like for me. So went back into public, and this time I went on the consulting side. So I was working in internal controls, risk mitigation, any type of compliance related activities in finance. Those were what I was doing in the time that I was going back into EY, and so I stayed there for 5 years. Again, learned a tremendous amount. Was looking at partner ranks, and what I found is that what was really it wasn't so much the idea of what it would be to become a partner that was exciting. It was really about it was the title. So but that was not what I ultimately really wanted, and I learned it through that process of deciding, well, is this really the right place for me, is this really what I want to do? I ultimately made the move to Kaiser Permanente, and it was amongst, I would say, the best decisions that I've made, because not only I started out as a director, I eventually became an executive, in the organization. So I'm in our finance organization as a vice president, and I've been able to do a lot of really cool things in a very mission-driven organization, which aligns very much with my personal values, in that I've been able to be, impactful in multiple spaces, in addition to being outside within our profession to add value as well. So it's been a great marriage of work, experience, impact in the community, living the mission, and adding value. So and with great teams. So really, really pleased just of how that's come forward.
Your journey is just has a lot of, I would say, significant turn when you move from Anderson to Robert Half, and then you went back to public to EY. Is and then you go to Kaiser Permanente. It's very different turns. It's none of those turns are the same.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, Rosie, that one of the things about that is it ties into like this. I have these principles of leadership, and one of them is building relationships with a broad group of people, because you never know how those relationships will support you in the different decisions that you might make in terms of a career. And so the fact that with when I decided I was going to go back into public accounting, that Anderson wasn't existing anymore. Coopers and Lybrand was now PricewaterhouseCoopers. So neither of the firms that I had previously worked for I could in essence go back to, but I had relationships in the other firms. I knew people at KPMG, EY, Deloitte, and I ultimately decided to pick up the phone. I called a person in the I want to say was this individual was a director in the recruiting organization at EY, and I had previously served with this individual on a board, and I told him that I was thinking about coming back into public accounting, and he's like, come on in, right? And we had a great conversation. I met with some additional people, and the next thing I know, I had an offer to join the firm. And so it's the relationships, right, that you build with people that really make a true impact. And it's not about what can you do for me, but the time that you built those relationships, that when there may be a need, or you want to kind of connect some dots, having done some really great work like we did together on that board, that allowed me to leverage that relationship when I was looking for something, because that person had knowledge and background in how I led, right, in the experiences that I had that could be valuable to their organization.